question for you.
Yes.
Which Marx brother is on the cover of the Beatles' Sgt. Pepper album?
My first thought was Harpo, but I'm going to guess Groucho.
Carl. No Marx brother
Okay.
is on the cover of Sgt. Pepper, which is surprising.
Yeah, it is.
Laurel and Hardy are there. The Bowery Boys are there.
Wow.
But no Marx brother. If you watch the DVDs that you have, and it's the 2016 Blu-rays that were released, you're going to see a couple of jokes that were not in there before. A discovery was made at some point in the last 10 years or so of a complete print of the film, which included a couple of jokes that were cut out because they were too risque, and they were put back in. One of them is in the Captain Spaulding number, where Groucho says the line, "I think I'll try and make her." That was cut out originally, but it's back in there now. And then there's another bit when he's dictating the letter later on to Zeppo.
Dear Elsie. No, never mind, Elsie. Do you want me to scratch Elsie? Well, if you enjoy that sort of thing, it's quite all right with me.
That was put back into the film, and it's there now if you see those 2016 Blu-rays.
They dropped most of the music from this, but the few bits of music that are in this that remained are by Bert Kalmer and Harry Ruby, who were very involved with the Marx Brothers for several productions and movies. And Bert Kalmer was the lyricist, and Harry Ruby wrote the music. Famously, they wrote "I Want to Be Loved by You," the famous Betty Boop song.
The Betty Boop song, yeah, right.
They wrote that. And they also wrote "Who's Sorry Now," which was a big hit in 1923, but eventually huge for Connie Francis. Who's Sorry Now? They wrote "Hooray for Captain Spaulding," "I'm Against It," and "Hail Hail for Donia."
They're from Horse Feathers and from Duck Soup, respectively.
Yeah. And then just a little cute note is that, they talk about how brave he is. And then, of course, the punchline is they find a caterpillar on his jacket.
Cowardice is unknown to you. Fear is not in you.
Pardon me, a caterpillar, Captain.
He faints.
And he faints because he's terrified that he had a caterpillar on him. He just faints cold. That caterpillar was a live caterpillar, and it's there the whole time. They put it on him from the beginning. If you look carefully.
I think I've noticed that. Yeah, I've seen that.
Yeah. It's
That's
a
amazing.
real caterpillar. No CGI. There's some interesting things, about Groucho's humor. One is that he breaks the fourth wall. Like he just makes eye contact with the camera.
Well, that's fine. I've heard of you and you've heard of me. Now, have you ever heard the one about the two Irishmen?
Oh, yes.
It's very funny the way he makes that into a joke by just looking at the camera. And then at another point, he says something like,
I'd rather not discuss it any further. Remember, there are children present.
He looks at the camera, like meaning you guys in the audience. I love that he says, "My retirement would be the greatest contribution to science ever." And then I thought this was really interesting.
But after all, we must remember that art is art. Still, on the other hand, water is water, isn't it? And east is east and west is west. And if you take cranberries and stew them like applesauce, it tastes much more like prunes than rhubarb does.
The annotated Marx Brothers, he surmises, there's a few jokes that are kind of like that. Like when he says the chest is covered in egg whites, was painted in egg whites. He thinks those jokes are references to a very popular thing in newspapers and magazines, which was the household hints. This was kind of a new concept that took hold of America, was this kind of idea of doing household hints. And, I think that was just very, very popular in the press and with housewives. And
that makes sense.
And so those were jokes kind of referring to that kind of
That's
thing.
like a Martha Stewart hint.
Yeah. So I think because it was fresh enough an idea that you referenced it, now we wouldn't even notice it because we're so used to those kinds of things.
Yeah, but now it just works as pure absurdity. There's a joke in that blackout scene that I don't quite understand, and maybe it has to do with the translation from the stage to the screen or something, but there's the gag where they open a window on one side of the room and there's a storm going on outside.
Oh, that's some storm, eh? That's a regular tornado. Come on, let's go this way. I think it's a shortcut. Come on, let's go. California.
It was filmed. It was not filmed or set in California.
That's true.
Which sort of baffled me. When I found out that the film was not made in Hollywood, it was made in New York. It was made It was made and set on Long Island. Before, I'd always assumed that was a joke about the fact that it was filmed in Hollywood. It was a kind of meta joke. But no, it wasn't filmed in Hollywood at all. It was filmed in New York.
We actually see Chico playing piano. Now, I thought it was interesting. I always thought, like, well, his song is Sugar in the Morning, Sugar in the Evening, Sugar in the Morning, Sugar in the Evening. That's not the same song. It's not,
No,
it
it's
just
not.
sounds like it. Yeah. It's actually called I'm Daffy Over You. And it was actually written by Chico and someone else.
It's co-written by Chico. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's very similar. So you always assume that's what they're playing, but it's not. It's not what they're playing.
I like when he says to Chico, I may be wonderful, but I think you're wrong, Ravelli. Because I looked that up. That's a song. And I've been listening to the song. It's I may be wrong, but I think you're wonderful. I may be wrong, but I think you're wonderful. And you can play that song here because it's public domain.
I may be wrong, but I think you're wonderful. I may be wrong, but I think you're swell. I like your style, say I think it's marvelous. I'm always wrong, so how can I tell?
You know what's really weird is Ravelli proposes that left-handed moths destroyed the painting.
Hey, Cap, it come to me like a flash. This painting wasn't stolen. Ha! You know what happened? This painting, Cap, is a disappear. And yes, it disappear. And you know what make it disappear? You'll never guess, Cap. What do you think of making this painting disappear, huh? Moths. Moths eat it. Left-handed moths.
But he uses that in the play too, where it's a sculpture. Makes no sense. And even Groucho's like, all right, I don't even understand that.
I do want to mention their names. Apparently they were given those nicknames and they were sort of based on their real predilections. And it was, I think, somebody who they used to play cards with basically handed out these nicknames to them. And Harpo, of course, got the name Harpo because of the harp. And Chico got the name Chico because he was always chasing after chicks. And it was Chico, Chicko, and then became Chico.
It's a typo in a printing.
Yeah, everything.
They accidentally dropped the K in one of the billings, and for some reason they just never corrected it. And most people, I always call him Chico.
Right, to this day, people think he's Chico, and
it's hard not to call it that.
When I meet someone and they say they like the Marx Brothers, those are one of my two litmus tests to find out as a comedy gatekeeper if they're a real Marx Brothers fan or a fake Marx Brothers fan. And one is if they say Chico. And two is if their favorite Marx Brothers movie is A Night at the Opera.
Well, I have a very glitchy brain.
I reject them both.
I have a very glitchy brain. So, I guarantee I'm going to say Chico a bunch of times. And I'm sorry, but I have one of those glitchy brains. So you just have to deal with it.
Groucho got the name simply because he was often sardonic and sarcastic. And he would make wisecracks and got called Groucho. And I have no idea where the nickname Zeppo came from.
Yeah, there's several stories and none of them are solid.
Yeah,
but there was like
Maybe
was kind of
he wanted to ride on an airship.
Yeah, now somebody says it is because of one. There is one story that it's because of the first Zeppelin flying, but it doesn't seem to match date wise.
Yeah.
But also there was some joke about Zeke and Zeppo. That was like a popular joke back then.
Well,
and anyway,
that's the thing I was getting towards.
Those
names, it's something where the sort of like the context around those names has sort of fallen away, and all you have left is these bizarre names. But at the time, in that era, the convention of putting an O at the end of a word and that being somebody's nickname was very, very common.
Right.
And if you look in old newspapers or old like shows or vaudeville stuff, you find a lot of characters with names like that. Hucko and Dinko and Binko and Zinko and things like that. And that's how, of course, later on, George Lucas paid tribute to that in The Empire Strikes Back when he created the character of Lando.
So the mother, because she adored Chico, gave him piano lessons. She wanted him to be the big movie star or performance vaudeville star. Gave him piano lessons. Obviously he got very good at it, but he was very undisciplined. And, he dropped out of school. They all dropped out of school, but he actually left home at a pretty young age. And, he was womanizing. They were all womanizers, but he was the biggest. He was like really, really
well-known. Yeah.
Yeah. Well-known womanizer.
He was famous for being charming and seductive.
Now, apparently he kind of he got really good at the Italian accent because of they were Jewish in their neighborhood. There was a certain amount of German Jews there, but there was also a lot of Italians, a lot of Irish and, those are like kind of clusters of neighborhoods with different ethnicities. And if you'd pass through, a few blocks, just a block away, it'd be like the Irish kids, and just a block away would be the Italians. And they would, beat each other up because kids are jerks and, people were even more prejudiced back then. And so he actually adopted, I think all of them kind of adopted accents so that they could make it through some of these neighborhoods and fake it. They could kind of pass, you could answer somebody in their accent and they wouldn't guess that you were Jewish, and that kind of thing. And then he was also a very serious bridge and pinochle player. And he'd appear like, even in back then, they'd have these shows that were like, how we have these poker shows where it's just people playing poker and an announcer talking about them playing poker. Well, they had like celebrity bridge and he would be on them, he would do that. And he was like considered one of the best pinochle players anywhere and one of the best bridge players. Harpo. All right. He was born Adolf and changed his name to Arthur. Now, there's a rumor that it was because of Germany and not wanting to be German sounding.
It had nothing to do with that.
It had nothing to do with Hitler. That's for sure, because it was way earlier than that.
Yeah.
It was just because he didn't like the nickname Addy, but also there was, at one point they all moved to Chicago and there was a very famous lawyer who had a very bad reputation and his name was Adolf Marx. Those Marks.
Oh, okay.
So that was also considered one of the reasons he changed it. And so he dropped out at a very young age, but he was always working. He was like an errand boy. He was doing all these little things. Chico got some work when they were a little older, playing piano for like movie theaters and stuff like that. And Harpo would sometimes come and substitute because they looked exactly alike when they were young. And he would kind of sit in and, they'd swap each other out. But he was never very good at
They did that later in life as well.
Yeah, they did that. Yeah.
I think there's an episode of I've Got a Secret, which was a show from the 1950s. They had Harpo Marx come out, and the secret was that he wasn't Harpo Marx, he was Chico.
Yeah, I saw that clip, and I was like, no, that's not Harpo. I knew it immediately.
I could tell too, and you could tell.
But when they were younger, they looked very, like identical. And then Zeppo and Groucho looked the most alike, so they would switch out. Now, the rumor is that Zeppo could switch out with Groucho anytime and nobody would know the difference, but that's probably also apocryphal. Like, it seemed like there were some reviews who were like, oh no, it's a Zeppo show. You know what I mean? Like he wasn't quite, who knows, but you hear different stories that he wasn't quite as good as Groucho. You could tell the difference. So
I've always heard that story too, that when he would substitute for Groucho on stage, he would be better.
Yeah, no, that's, you hear different stories, but I've heard that wasn't really true. Now they would, of course, build each other up in the press and talk very kindly about each other as brothers. So I think that was like kind of an in-house thing. And then there's also a rumor that in this very movie, Animal Crackers, they switch roles, but that's apparently also not true. So is Harpo a mime? That's one of the things I wanted to ask you. Is Harpo a mime?
No.
No. Okay.
No.
Why not?
Because for the same reason I don't want to call him a clown, because I dislike both mimes and clowns. And I like Harpo.
Ventriloquist?
He's not. He is not a ventriloquist, a mime or a clown. And I like some ventriloquists.
Some put him under the category of mime. Some do, and I think that's
absolutely
not completely. I think that's not. I don't think that's illegitimate because he never talked. Now, when he was one of the first roles he ever did before these Marx Brothers movies, he did a little guest role, like a supporting role, very brief role in a silent movie called Too Many Kisses. And in that movie, he mouths a sentence. So he did his first role in any movie was him actually speaking.
But it was in a silent movie.
so then the card came up and said what he said. So nobody heard his voice.
That's the closest he ever got to a speaking role.
Right.
I do know that in, I think, their final film that they did, which was Night in Casablanca, he was offered a huge exorbitant amount of money to speak in the film for the first time ever and turned it down. And
he just was always in character. He would even go on talk shows in character. He would not break character. When he was public, he didn't speak. Just quickly, he's known for the gookie face. It's called the gookie, Gookie, gookie face, which is him blowing up his cheeks and crossing his eyes and puckering his mouth. I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to do the gookie. We'll show a picture.
You don't look at me. I'm not going to do it. I literally can't physically do it. I don't even know how he did it.
So he got that from when he was a kid, there was a guy who would roll cigars. Like he'd sit in the shop window rolling cigars, and he'd get so into the concentration of doing it that he would unconsciously kind of make that face because he was just like really seriously, And so Harpo.
That's not a face you make when you're concentrating. That's a face you make when you're having a stroke. That's.
In 1933, in the height of their fame, he was a goodwill ambassador to the Soviet Union. And he did a little bit of spying stuff, kind of. He was a secret courier. He would tape letters to his leg when he'd go on the airplane to come home and that sort of thing. It was communiques from the U.S. Embassy. Yes, Harpo would strap communiques.
Because who would suspect Harpo
wouldn't.
Of all people? Who would suspect? Yeah. Obviously, J. Edgar Hoover must have had him down as, a Jew and therefore potential subversive.
It's like sending what's the basketball player who went to Kim Jong Il?
Dennis Rodman. It's like sending Dennis Rodman to North Korea.
I have no doubt Dennis Rodman knew exactly what he was doing. Anyway, that's just a guess. Okay. The other thing, of course, Harpo was famously friends with all these Algonquin Roundtable people. He knew everybody. He was friends with Salvador Dali. I think he knew H.G. Wells. He knew a lot of amazing people.
Part of the crowd that kind of gave you me.
Yes, the New Yorker kind of intelligentsia back then, back when the New Yorker was intelligent. No, I'm just kidding. It still is. Here's one of my favorite Groucho lines. Groucho did this spontaneously on stage during the staging of Animal Crackers. As Animal Crackers was running, the stock market crashed hard. So spontaneously, when they were doing Animal Crackers, he said, the pigeons are now feeding the people in Central Park. I thought that was a wonderful line. Anyway,
that is great.
Groucho lost a lot of money. Out of all the brothers, Groucho lost the most. He had pretty much all of his stuff invested, and they say that he never slept well again. That he had lifelong insomnia, and the origin was the stock market crash. He would slip in a lot of you'll notice little stock market jokes in all of their stuff because they reflected reality, and he really never got over that. That was really devastating for him. The Coconuts, set in Florida, that was when talkies were coming into play as a medium. It took 6 weeks of filming. 1929 was when it came out, and when it was finished and the Marx Brothers watched it, they wanted to buy it back so that it couldn't be released. They were they were horrified. They were like, "This isn't funny. This isn't good. We don't like it." But it was a huge hit and people liked it. The critics liked it. But it's a very interesting and very technically primitive film. They actually had to have, at that point, the cameras were in boxes, soundproof boxes, because the cameras made so much noise. This was one of the first films that they did this very creative thing where they filmed the dancers from the ceiling, which is something Busby Berkeley would eventually do. The Marx Brothers were the first, the director and the creative process that made this film. It was the first to do that kind of shot. It was very groundbreaking.
Well, it's interesting to watch films at that early stage because they're still sort of in that era of silence, and they're still presented almost like just a Broadway show on stage.
Yeah,
on film rather. They're still almost presented that way, and the way even in Animal Crackers begins with the cast listed, the entire cast with their characters listed at the very beginning of the film, because people still thought of a movie as a play on film. And so that would be like getting the playbill and reading the cast before the show starts. And so they would put that up first. And then, some of the early films of that time still had a very static camera, and everything was filmed in a long shot. And it's interesting to watch that because they were still sort of, the language of film was still being created, really.
Yeah. The Marx Brothers wanted to film real beach footage, and the movie company's like, no, we're not going to spend the money. So it looks very stagey. Everything looks very fake and stagey.
Yeah, I think what I read was that the studio said it wouldn't make sense to have a realistic setting when you're wearing a grease paint mustache.
Yeah.
And I could not agree with that more. And it's why these early films are the ones that I like, and they work for me because the Marx Brothers are in a cartoon environment. They are cartoon characters. Yeah. And if you put them in a realistic environment, they become grotesquerie, is what they become. They become like the Dick Tracy villains in the Warren Beatty movie. They stand out like sore thumbs. And if you put them in a realistic setting, like a somewhat realistic setting, like A Night at the Opera, then you start wondering, doesn't anyone notice that this guy's wearing a grease paint mustache?
Let me just say that, Coconuts is a really confusing movie. It's like the jokes in that movie, they come
I've seen it. Fast. It's very different from the others.
That's a very inside joke movie. That's a very, you had to be there in that year that when it came out to get a lot of those jokes. They started understanding that you need to be a little more general because, again, Coconuts was one of the absolute first talkies. I mean, that's, they were still kind of figuring this stuff out. But Animal Crackers was definitely the first Marx Brothers movies that has its shit together. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
and it's technically much improved from the one previous and all that, but it's still pretty chaotic. And it's still pretty interesting. The adaptation, to me, it's not a perfect adaptation by any means. It could have been much better, but I think they were still getting used to what you did to adapt something from Broadway to.
You're right. And this is the one that's the template that the next three sort of follow. And the Coconuts is a bit of an outlier from those other four, so to speak. And Monkey Business is kind of unique in that it's the only one where at the very beginning you meet all the brothers at the same time, and they're all part of a group at the beginning.
Yeah, they're all in barrels.
In all the other movies, and in Animal Crackers, you're going to find they're separate people that meet each other as the movie goes on.
Yeah,
or they're in little groups that meet each other as the movie goes on. And that's usually how it's done. But in that one, they're a team.
Yeah.
From the opening shot, which is interesting. I love Horse Feathers so much. It also includes the rowboat scene, which is one of my favorites. And so
and apparently when she fell in the water, she didn't really know how to swim, and Groucho was just like ignored her, and it was not a good thing. Yeah.
Here's the thing about that. The rowboat scene in Horse Feathers begins with Groucho in a rowboat romancing Thelma Todd. It ends with him leaving her to drown, and cuts away.
Yeah,
there is no resolution in which she is saved, and she calls for a lifesaver, and he takes a roll of lifesavers out of his pocket and throws her one of them. And I really love it when a movie from almost 100 years ago has a reference in it that is still contemporary. Lifesavers are still a thing. We still have lifesavers. It reminds me of when in Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, when Sean Connery says about the Grail diary, "I should have mailed it to the Marx Brothers." And I love that because it's a scene taking place in 1936, and he's making a joke, but the joke is still funny in 1989.
Yeah.
The references haven't changed in all that time.
Yep.
But anyway, the Marx Brothers, as Sean Connery would say.
But sadly, this was again Thelma Todd. Same, but she died on a somber note.
She died very tragic life and died very young.
Soon after this, not too.
Yeah, didn't she die in her car of asphyxiation?
Asphyxiation. She was sitting in her car. There's some conspiracy theories it was murder or suicide, but it seems like it was an accident. I knew someone in high school whose sister died that way. And please, everybody realize if you're in a enclosed space, or even if you have very high snow around your car, that anything that blocks that exhaust pipe, you can be asphyxiated very easily. And that's what happened. She was so young and
was a very well-known comedian in her own right.
Yeah.
I'd done a series of shorts with Zazu Pitts.
What's the name?
Thelma Todd.
What's the address?
1222 Kosciuszko.
Are you trying to hog the whole street? Why, this little old car is such an insignificant... It's a cheesy little thing, that's what it is.
An informer.
And was a popular comedian at the time.
And Patsy Kelly, right?
And Patsy
Rosemary
Kelly,
Baby connection.
Right. Yeah.
I
love Thelma Todd almost as much as, maybe more than Lillian Roth in Animal Crackers.
Yeah. Duck Soup. Again, Kalmar and Ruby writing the songs. Additional material by Arthur Schnickman. Cheekness. Forget it. Nat Parent. Anyway. Okay. So Duck Soup. Now, I'd love to do a little essay on comparing Duck Soup to Dr. Strangelove. I don't know why, but that appeals to me.
I thought you were going to say compare it to $1 Million Legs with W.C. Fields, which is a similar film where W.C. Fields is the president of a country. And I think they came out in the same year. And it's almost it's basically Duck Soup with W.C. Fields.
You know what? I think I've seen that movie. I thought I hadn't seen that, but I think I have.
It's not as good as Duck Soup. Yeah, there's actually there's 3 films around that came out around that same time, which all have a similar sort of a bent to them. Duck Soup, $1 Million Legs, and I forget the third one.
That's interesting.
With 3 iconic comedians in their sort of leader of a country role. Yeah, I do want to mention around this same time, Harpo made an appearance in a Popeye cartoon, and it was one of the early black and white Max Fleischer cartoons, which is my favorite iteration of Popeye, when he seemed to live in New York. He was walking around these tenement buildings, and Olive Oyl lived on the top floor, and he had to go to visit her. And anyway, in that version of Popeye, there's a cartoon where Popeye has to, he's got Sweepy, and he's trying to get Sweepy to go to sleep, but things keep making noise around him, and he can't figure out what to do about the noise because he needs the baby to go to sleep. And at some point, Harpo Marx shows up, and Popeye is so infuriated that he punches Harpo Marx and kills him.
Wow. That's terrible.
And the next scene, you see Harpo's lying there, and the little ghost harp, the ghost comes up, Angel with the harp playing in every cartoon. And that's the end of the cartoon. And I thought, wow, Popeye just murdered Harpo Marx.
Room Service, 1938. This was the only film not written for any Marx Brothers.
Right. It was a play that was adapted into a Marx Brothers.
Hey, wait a minute. What are you fellas trying to do to me?
Room service.
Maury Riskin, their longtime writer, adapted it. And it had Lucille Ball. It had Ann Miller, who I mentioned before. She was only 15. She lied and said she was 18, but she was only 15. And she was a little intimidated by Harpo, actually. And it's also surprising because this is the least physical of any of their comedies. There's not a lot of huge physical comedy and not a lot of honking horns and stuff, Next one is At the Circus. I actually like this movie. I think that's a pretty pleasant movie. 1939.
I can't do it.
Let's say this. We are comparing Marx Brothers movies to Marx Brothers movies, and that's a little unfair in a way to some of these movies, because if you compare them to comedies from that time in general,
I'm sure
they're superior. They're
very,
superior.
very.
So I thought At the Circus
much of their time.
Now, At the Circus has the wonderful Lydia the Tattooed Lady number.
That's the only thing about it I like. Yeah. It's that that's where Groucho sings Lydia the Tattooed Lady, and which was later covered by Kermit the Frog.
Lydia, oh Lydia, say have you met Lydia? Lydia the Tattooed Lady. She has eyes that folks adore so, and a torso even more so.
Eve Arden is in this. I love seeing her so young. If you can't be an athlete, be an athletic supporter.
If you can't be an athlete, be an athletic supporter.
I love Eve Arden. And she's super cool in this.
Grease never goes away. Grease is always looming.
She's a
Grease
villain.
Is always around us.
Grease
is the word.
Grease is the word. She's a villain in this, and I love her. I love her in this. And she at one point she's walking on the ceiling upside down with suction cups. It's super cool. It's a super cool scene. And some of the jokes in that scene are very funny.
When I see Chico at the beginning of the movie walking through the circus and saying hello to everybody. Hey, how you doing, man? Oh, I'm going to help you with that thing. Hey, you're going to be great tonight. And he's friendly and he's helping everyone. And they're all like, hey, Tony, good to see you. He's Antonio in every movie after that. He's always Tony. He's like Tony Danza, always played Tony. And it just feels like these characters are funny and interesting because they're outsiders. They're true, complete outsiders. They can never just walk down the street and say hi to everybody, and everybody likes them, and they want to help people, and and some poor young guy who's like, oh, I'll never get a job in the thing. He's like, hey, you're gonna be great. Don't worry. With a mind like you got, that doesn't make any sense as a character for me.
And with each movie following, after with each movie it gets softer and softer, and it is I definitely feel the loss of character with Harpo, especially as each movie continues. And I agree with that, and it is a little heartbreaking. I agree with you there. I mean, this is especially post Day at the Races. I would say you get a little. I'm not crazy about Harpo at the Circus, but that being said, I still think it's a pretty fun movie. And again, in the scheme of all movies, it's not bad. It's not a bad comedy, and there's some there's a few good lines. Buster Keaton actually ghost wrote some jokes in this. He was in there. That was directed by Edward Buzzell. The next one after that, 1940, was Go West. That one did nothing for me. couldn't even get into
it's hard to
it.
it's hard to get through that.
Yeah, I couldn't get through it. I think I only watched like half of it. Again, that was Buzzell directing again. That one is especially, where you're like, this is definitely not up to snuff for them. The big store is actually pretty fun. That's 1941.
I used to do this in vaudeville.
That was supposed to be their big farewell movie.
But that was the one with Lucille Ball. We already mentioned that, right?
No, that was Room Service.
Oh, Room Service and the big store. Okay,
The big store just takes place in a store, a big store, like Macy's kind of thing.
There you go.
Groucho plays Flywheel, so he borrows that name from the radio show. He and Chico did a radio show called, what's it called? Flywheel.
It was called Flywheel, Shyster, and Flywheel.
Yeah. And
it was just Chico and just Groucho.
Yeah.
Which works really well for radio because those were the verbal ones, obviously. Harpo on the radio, not quite so much.
Yeah. So that had Margaret Dumont was back in that, and it's a pretty fun. I mean, it's not as good as the early ones, but there's actually some really fun musical numbers. There's a huge Groucho musical extravaganza number that's pretty fun. Harpo and Chico do their bits, some really good solos. Yeah. Lots of music in this one, which is, kind of a going backwards thing. When it comes to comedy, I'm not partial to comedies having a lot of music in them, but when it comes to the Marx Brothers, I definitely enjoy
the music. You really expect it.
And I almost wish Animal Crackers, I wouldn't have minded if Animal Crackers had a little more music in it, if you wanted the truth. I know a lot of people.
I think that's the right amount. I even like the lovers song when they, when Lillian Roth and her boyfriend sing a little song. It's such a silly little song. And then in Horse Feathers is where we get Everyone Says I Love You.
Everyone says I love you.
The fly, when he gets stuck on the fly paper too, says I love you.
Everyone says I love you, but just what they say it for I never knew. It's just inviting trouble for the poor sucker who says I love you.
Everyone
yes, and that was from you. So that song is from the play version of Animal Crackers.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, and it would have fit in great in that movie. But I do love that song. I love that song, and I love that whole scene in the movie where they're all singing it, and Groucho is singing it wrong because, like I said, he is a nihilist and doesn't care about anything.
I mean, they all of these movies try to put in little cartoony fantasy elements, and some of them work and some of them don't. Big Store. So out of all of the post Day at the Races movies, I would probably recommend Big Store as okay. To me, this is the best. But so there's this really cool when Harpo's doing his harp scene, he's in a room full of mirrors, and what's fun is he has a reflection on both sides of him, and they both end up playing different instruments. They end up being like completely different.
That's
Harpo is
cool.
playing.
That's cool.
One of them playing the cello. And so, they do bring in these fantasy elements that keep you in that place where it kind of makes sense that they're a little bit odd. There's a little bit of a, whimsy. Again,
you know what I want to do?
Yeah.
I want to find that scene and I want to Photoshop it so that Harpo is playing the harp, but in the mirror, it's Oprah.
That's pretty good. That's not bad. All right. I'll give you that. I'll give you that one. Nicely done, Mr. Dater.
Should do the mirror scene from Duck Soup where it's Harpo and Oprah. I should make that. Oh my God, I got to make that. Why didn't anyone think of that before?
All right, two more movies. Night at Casablanca from 1946.
Say, what do you think you're doing? Holding up the building? Come on!
Really not worth particularly watching except for the harp and piano scenes, which are actually outstanding. In Night at Casablanca, Harpo's in this gorgeous setting because he's in this room where there's some stored Nazi treasures and all kinds of beautiful items in a dark room, and he's playing the harp in the dark, and he's playing Hungarian Rhapsody, and it is just exquisite.
I can see that. I can enjoy that. I'm going to look that
beautiful.
up.
and Chico's piece is him doing a very physical piano thing, a little more physical even than you normally see him. It's really wonderful. So anyway, that's the only reason to watch that. It's not a good movie.
I do remember hearing that A Night in Casablanca was the movie where they were filming it, and the scene was them having to chase after an airplane, which is sort of the ending of the movie.
Yes,
and at some point
terrible.
They had to redo the scene, and they're running and running and running. And that's when Groucho turned to Chico and said, "Have you had enough of this yet?" And that was when they retired. That was when they said, "We're done. That's it. No more."
That makes sense, because it's not the best.
They were not young men at that point.
They were not young men, and that makes total sense. And it's a terrible scene. That's a terrible ending. It's a terrible scene. So the last one is, and I think you don't count this as a Marx Brothers movie, if I'm not mistaken.
I don't think it counts because they're in it. They're all in it, but not together at any point.
Love Happy. The name is Love Happy. It's from 1949. It's definitely their worst movie. Sadly, got to say it. It's definitely worst movie. This is a story that Harpo came up with. He came up with the whole story, and Mary Pickford was one of the people who produced it. And again, God bless him for trying. They wanted to try it. Groucho is just like a narrator in this. He's in it. They're not all in the same room at the same time.
He's a private detective, or
it's really not very good, sadly. But
but I think it's free on Amazon.
Yeah, it could be, and
again, it's not worth it.
Yeah, and again, it wasn't supposed to have the other Marx Brothers in it, but Chico was broke. And so, as usual. And so he's like, please let me on this thing. And then the movie company, when they heard Chico was on, were like, well, we're not going to do this unless Groucho is also in on it. So it's that kind of thing. But one little of note of significance is it was possibly the first role or first time we ever saw Marilyn Monroe in a film.
Yeah, it was one of her first appearances in a movie.
We're going to try out three girls with a part in this picture. I think it was called Love Happy or something. A terrible picture. So I sat there with Lester, and the three girls were there. I was introduced to them, and he says, now the first girl walk. And she walked across from one end to the other. He says, very nice. He says, now the second girl walk, and she did it too. And then the third one. He says, now you walk across. And he says, well, which one do you like the best? I says, you're kidding, aren't you? Now, how can you take anybody except that last girl? Well, the whole room revolved when she walked. And it was Marilyn Monroe.
Is there anything I can do for you? What a ridiculous statement.
Mr. Grunion, I want you to help me.
I have a little sand left. What seems to be the trouble?
Some men are following me.
Really? I can't understand why.
I remember that being shown on local TV in New York when, like in the 80s when I was a teenager. And boy, did they hype it as like the zaniness of the Marx Brothers meets Marilyn Monroe. And it was as if you were gonna have an enjoyable experience almost. And then the movie was shown, and oh God.
Yeah, it's not good. It's not good.
Yeah. What I just want to say is it interests me when I watch those is how gracefully Groucho aged compared to the others. And I think it was because he evolved his look and his appearance, and he leaned into his age in a way that when you see kinescopes from the 1950s with Harpo or Chico, who appeared sometimes on TV shows like What's My Line or something like that, it's kind of sad because they're still wearing the costume and the wig and everything. And you just see it and go, oh my God, what's this guy, 70? Of course, it was probably like 50 because 50 looked 70 back then. But then Groucho, when you watch You Bet Your Life, he's transitioning into old Groucho. Now the mustache is real, and he's wearing these different kind of style of glasses, and he's letting himself go bald, and he's gone gray and bald, and he's wearing just a normal suit, and he's transitioning into this very dignified character of sort of old Groucho. And then later on, he adopted the beret and became really old Groucho. And that was another phase of his existence. The thing to think about aging gracefully is just lean into it, embrace your changing appearance and your look. And because it always fascinates me how long Groucho's career lasted after the Marx Brothers, and then even had a resurgence while in my lifetime in the 1970s. And he played Carnegie Hall in the 1970s, and I think it has a lot to do with the fact that he managed to evolve his appearance and lean into his age.
And I really he's one of those people. He is absolutely one of those people who I would love to know what he would think of like the politics right now, like all of it, you know, conservative, liberal, and everything in between, and everything that's going on. Like he is absolutely one of those people. I really wish so badly. I'd love to know what he thinks, because you know, I think like you know, life is very complicated. Yeah, I don't know.
It's not gonna be like Bill and Ted when they go and get Aristotle, and you know, just it's not
I don't
gonna
think
be
I could
good.
be. I
It's
don't
not
think
gonna
I
go
could
well.
be. I couldn't be disappointed because I find anything he says interesting. I wouldn't. There's no way. I'm not a cancel culture person, so
No,
I would not be disappointed.
I'm not saying.
Even if
I'm not saying it can't.
even if he said what I didn't want to hear, I would not be disappointed. I would find it interesting.
I'm talking about that clip with him on Firing Line with William F. Buckley, where he's going at Buckley and he's disagreeing with Buckley. But earlier in the thing, he says when Buckley ran, he said, "Well, I would have voted for you because I thought you had some very good ideas." So you know, I think you'd be disappointed. We really want to believe our idols from the past would agree with us now, and I think almost always we would be.
Well, I think you're
better off not knowing.
I think you're projecting onto me because I don't get disappointed like about that stuff. I would like to, you know, get into a conversation with Groucho about why he found Buckley an interesting candidate. So, you know, like I read everything, you know, I read both sides. I'm fascinated with all that stuff. So I wouldn't be disappointed. I just would be, to me, it's just fascinating. So I'd really, again,
okay.
I think Groucho is one of those people. He's just outstandingly, you know, he'd have something interesting to say no matter how it fell.
Mr. Marx, would you answer Mr. Buckley's question? Is the world funny?
No, I don't think it's terribly funny, you know. I don't think it's ever terribly funny. Sometimes there are isolated pieces of the world that is funny, but generally it's a pretty serious world. It always has been. It's people struggling for a living and starving and all kinds of riots. No, I don't think the world is funny. It's like saying, is a man funny? Even a professional comedian can be funny perhaps 8 minutes out of about 24 hours. But a comedian isn't it? They're the dreariest people in the world. You should talk to my wife sometime, which is more than I do.